Lecture 12, Foundations of Nature Appreciation. We concluded our previous lecture with a pretty significant question. If European settlers were so hostile towards the natural environment, how then did we as a society come to value and, in many cases, revere wild nature? Well, according to Roderick Nash, intellectual historian of wilderness, appreciation of wilderness began in the cities, both European cities and, eventually, American cities. Members of genteel American society, rich people with lots of connections, who lived in the cities and were a part of the literati, L-I-T-E-R-A-T-I, literati, which means men of arts and letters, guys who had cultural capital, they participated in European cultural trends. Because of their positionality, these men participated in rituals of gentility like the European Grand Tour. Through these rituals, they were exposed to the Enlightenment's emphasis on natural philosophy and European literary and aesthetic conventions. In particular, they learned of the developing aesthetic of European Romanticism. The Romantic movement in Europe can be traced to the 1600s, but didn't become widely known or fashionable until the 18th and early 19th centuries. Three elements in particular contributed to the development of this Romantic movement: the 18th century aesthetics of the sublime and beautiful as articulated by Edmund Burke, deism, which linked nature positively to religion, and the philosophy of primitivism, which celebrated the perceived primitive qualities of early humans as a correction for corrupt urban civilization. In this presentation, we will discuss Edmund Burke's theories of the sublime and deism. We'll talk about the importance of the philosophy of primitivism in Module 3. The Enlightenment heralded some breakthroughs in European astronomy and physics that revealed a vast, complex, and harmonious universe that supported religious assertions of a divine source. Deserts, oceans, and mountains were recast in this new scientific religious light as majestic and marvelous creations, rather than blemishes and obstacles. Mountains, in particular, had previously been considered ugly deformities, warts or pimples on the Earth's surface. By the late 17th century, mountains were rhetorically reframed as mighty, majestic demonstrations of God's handiwork, if not His very image. By the 18th century, it was a short leap to find beauty in wild scenery, such as mountains. The pastoral, the rural shepherd and farmer, took a back seat to the vast, chaotic scenery of wild nature. In 1757, Edmund Burke published his foundational work, Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and the Beautiful. He argued that the terror and horror attendant to wild nature is actually rooted in awe, exultation, and delight, rather than dread and loathing. Burke did include a caveat, though. Terror itself is not sublime. It requires an assurance of safety, a distance from the true danger, which is death, and that distance then allows appreciation. Part of what made Burke's work so revolutionary and interesting was that he offered physiological explanations for sensations, scientific explanations for why people felt certain ways when they encountered stimuli. The sublime evoked an invigorating tightening of the body, while the beautiful resulted in relaxation. Ideas like this significantly broadened the limited classical definition of order and beauty. Let's look at the difference between sublime and beautiful. We can use a structural dichotomy. In fact, the sublime and beautiful very much mirror the nature-culture dichotomy, where the sublime is associated with nature and the beautiful is associated with culture. So some characteristics of the sublime include a vastness or a sense of the infinite, a show of strength or force or power in some symbolic way. It is typically unkempt and rugged. It is also obscure and chaotic, mysterious even, dark, gloomy, foreboding, as well as stimulating and astonishing. The beautiful, in contrast, is typically considered small and delicate, fragile, characterized by order, symmetry, control. There is clarity and harmony in the beautiful, as well as light, and it creates sensations of relaxation, as well as the idea that the world is knowable. By the late 1700s, European philosophers were setting precedents for the appreciation of uncivilized nature. Deism emerged from this Enlightenment trend, expanding these aesthetic relationships between God and wild nature, like the sublime, into the basis of a religion. Deists based their entire faith in the existence of God on the application of reason to nature. According to deists, the Creator, or God, created the universe and made it work on the basis of scientifically discernible principles and laws. Therefore, the mind of God is in nature. In 1720, deist John Ray asserted that the Bible and nature together comprised what he termed the twofold book of God. Deists perceived wilderness as pure nature, and therefore the clearest medium through which God communicated with humans and demonstrated his power. For deists, one must go to uninhabited nature in order to find spiritual truths. Natural theologists, people who embraced deism and the emerging sciences, advocated for the scientific study of natural environments to discern God's laws. Naturalists like John Bartram considered the American wilderness an exceptional natural laboratory in which to study the, quote, glorious works of the Creator, end quote. Those of you interested in the Everglades National Park should check out the writings and illustrations of William Bartram, John Bartram's son. Between 1773 and 1777, William Bartram traveled the southeastern border of America, documenting species of plants and animals and his contact with indigenous peoples. While Bartram's works were considered natural history, science, his writings were heavily influenced by Burke and Romanticism. His sketches are also considered aesthetically significant today. Burke's theory of the sublime and beautiful galvanized interest in European Romanticism, which was both indebted to and a reaction against Enlightenment rationalism. European Romanticism rejected the Enlightenment appreciation of order and progress and the privileging of rationalism over sensation. In contrast, Romantics asserted the importance of the senses and sensory experiences, as well as emotions. They sought out these experiences in nature, especially the sublime. Related to their fascination with sensation were their interests in the strange, remote, solitary, and mysterious. As opposed to rationalism, Romantics advocated mysticism. Mysticism was a philosophy that suggested, in order to attain knowledge and insight into truth, people should seek a heightened state of sensory awareness and contemplation. Mysticism influenced Romantics' beliefs about the recreative solitude one could find in nature. Ultimately, European Romanticism was a reaction against the dawn of modernity, brought about by industrialization, urbanization, and increasing feelings of alienation. Much of Europe was suffering from deforestation. Wild nature was exceedingly difficult to locate. Cities were bursting with filth, disease, and poverty, and the political landscape was rocky at best, with the French Revolution inspiring doubt in monarchies and aristocracy. European Romanticism challenged the notion that these changes were positive and represented cultural progress. While America had yet to exhaust its natural resources or experience the full force of industrialization, many of the ideas associated with European Romanticism were appealing to certain Americans, especially the literati. In the early 19th century, it was possible for the first time in history to travel widely in the northeastern United States without contact with wild spaces. Because of this fact, wilderness became a novelty for gentlemen of leisure and learning. The literati, primarily men, returned from their European excursions steeped in Romanticism, and they worked to counteract the antipathy towards nature that had become a part of the national American character. You'll note that these men of letters were people who did not face challenges of survival on a daily basis. They were not pioneers who had to eke a living out of the uncultivated lands of the West or manage often hostile relationships with indigenous peoples. Through their artworks, though, writing initially and then paintings and photography, these men perpetuated an American romantic movement and advocated for appreciation of nature. Art was critical to the perpetuation of these new ideas about nature. By as early as the middle of the 19th century, wilderness appreciation had become a literary genre embraced by growing numbers of Americans. In the next presentation, we will discuss the development of American Romanticism and examine the first American art movement, the Hudson River School painters.